It's about time for a horror build. I'm going to run through the build I've got going on here, as well as alternate specials you may want to consider for some different cases. But before that, I do want to mention that this is a PvP video, and it's just my own builds. There's no alliance stuff going on here. If you don't like it or don't think it's the best, great, use something that you think is better than that. I also do want to mention that I do have a builds document, which is linked in the description of all my different YouTube videos. It shows things like this for the Helma. I'll be adding the UAV ship, the Horror, just after this video. It has a bunch of content in there that you can look at and take if it works. That's linked in the description of my YouTube videos, 100% for free. Now with that, let's go ahead and jump into the build for the Horror. It is pretty interesting, 550 million armor points on the base hull. We might need to get into a refactor with the next tier or 2 tiers later, assuming the game lasts that long, that is. In any case, this ship does have, fairly decent stats. It has stun resist, some defenses. I'll get into defenses versus deflections a little bit later. The long version of the story is that we are moving to 100% defenses and moving away from deflection, but it's going to take a whole tier or more than that to make the transition happen. Not exactly what I would have done. Now the horror here is really interesting, has a bunch of very interesting stats, has a death zone depth charge that does a bunch of weird stuff with some concussive damage, although you can't really boost any of this stuff and you can't drive the ship anyway as it's a defender in your base, so there's nothing much that you can do about it. It also does have a targeting system just used for the tracking and the targeting, stuff like that, so we'll try to move in some cases here. Now what you need to know in terms of the weapons for this ship is you are going to use the one that came with the ship in all cases, and this is the Blackwater UAV. This weapon is really interesting. I've actually heard that it is bug, and that bug is why you're not going to use chain count, because this UAV does not chain. Maybe that's because the swarm time there is 0 seconds, or is going to be 0 seconds, or is less than 1 second. There is some sort of bug going on with the swarm time, which makes UAV chain count not work. If Kixeye does ever change anything with the chaining, which I may suspect they would, or at least add some text to clarify what the intended behavior is, they will do that by adding text to the weapon here. Long story short, don't use chain count. It should work. It seems like it should work, but because this game is very clear, or at least we would hope so, it doesn't. Now that's about all I can say on that subject. So don't use chain count. That's a weapon there that UAV is supposed to chain, it doesn't. That's what I've got. Now in terms of the actual specials you want to use, the first one is going to be a UAV damage boosting special, which is the UAV targeting circuitry. This gives the most damage at plus 80%, and the projectile speed bonus is also nice. Now you see the chain range and chain count on here. That currently does absolutely nothing. Just keep that in mind. I'm just putting this on here for the UAV damage. Even though it says chain count 2, it's not actually going to work. The next thing you're going to want to consider is evade. Now the interesting thing with evade is that this ship, if you go ahead and look at the defense stats, has no base evade. Now unfortunately for you, attacking ships such as the Hololight Carrier have an accuracy of 400%. This means you need to break above 75% evade before it is even remotely useful against the Hololight Carrier. Now for this reason, I guess I should say the Hololight Cruiser, only put evade on here if you're going to max it out and get to 75%, which actually I do intend to do. And this will continue to change and evolve as you are continuing into the meta and we get another accuracy-based ship, or U1 changes something with the Hololight. There are other things that could change here. So I've gone ahead and thrown on Agility System 4, which right now is absolutely useless because I only have 50% evade, which is not enough to be greater than that 75%. Although the slow and stun resistance, or I guess the stun resistance, does help. Now in terms of evade, there are some things you're going to want to consider. The armor has 12.4% here that you could use, and the limited evade armor is well locked to Conquerors. So it looks like you are stuck with the regular one, 12.5%, and 4 of those, you will get your evade a lot closer to 75%, although still not quite there. Before we continue into our last 2 evade specials, which you could consider, I'm going to give you a concussive special, which is the greatest concussive damage special in the game here, which is going to be the Zip Drive Y. There are a few older ones like Zip Drive X, although those are, again, things that or pretty old here. Tier 10 at this point is several whole cycles ago, so you should have this one. And this will double your concussive damage as well as some concussive reload. Now again, if you are going to play around with evade, you're going to want to take the 70% number and get it up as high as possible, and that's going to be using the evade specials that you possibly could use here, which is going to be things like the evade upgrade and 2 of those. Now this will get you up to 80%, which will make some of the hull lights start missing. Unfortunately, that's going to be maybe 20% less damage taken at the end of the day, which I don't think is worth it. So for all those people who commented and everyone, you scroll down the description who say, Derpy, your evade build sucks, why are you using it? I'm not. This is the best option for you if you want to go with evade, because I don't think it's going to be useful at all based on the accuracy being 400% on the attacking chips. I'm going to rip this all off and go with concussive damage instead. Now, the concussive damage special is really only one you want to go for, and that is the concussive upgrade, which, I mean, there's really not a lot of options for this hull, which is why it's kind of interesting, a UAV defender that UAVs don't work with. I'm also going to take this armor and strip it off because that evade is not useful, combat speed is not very useful, and, extra repair duration, extra build time, not much point for that here. At this point, you're noticing my concussive damage is higher, which is fantastic, up to 36 million, although it doesn't quite work like that with defense and the salvo reload time and other stuff like that here. You may also notice that at this point, I don't have an engine. That's because I at least have not been able to find. I was very, very surprised by this. If we go to our engines and actually pull up just the specials, all the limited specials here, there is no turbocharged engine CT. There's R, C, X, other stuff like that, M, but there's nothing here that will boost concussive damage by 10%, so I've chosen to use Evade Upgrade instead. And if you wanted to, you could actually go for the new engine that came out, which I'm very much considering doing, which is the Stalwart Sentinel Engine 2. This would give you some damage and make sure that you would not move, which is a feature of this hull. The range on this is pretty long at 160, and would give you, an extra 10%, a little bit less than that in terms of armor points. So that is another option for you may want to consider. If you want the ship to move really, really fast, just throw on whatever old engine you can, maybe just one of the well, I'm not going to say a sync drive because that would produce interesting behaviors. If you want it to move really fast, just go ahead and throw in whatever old engine you want. Again, I'm not really sure what you would actually do with that because it's such a novelty here in terms of actually wanting a ship that moves very fast for this one because of the really, really high range. Maybe Onslaught engine is the way to go here, or just something else that's pretty old. Now, that's if you want it to move, which I don't really think most people will, because the range here is 160, you don't have to worry about that. Instead, most people are probably just going to go for the extra damage instead and put it way back somewhere so it will start moving at the base 21 or 20 combat speed, and that's about it. If you want it to 100% not move at all, then Stalwart Sentinel Engine 2 is the best option for you. I intend to go with the concussive upgrade, which I actually can't spell, so that's a fun fact for you. Concussive upgrade is what you want to use. At least in my mind, it's better than the other options out there, and will help increase damage by just under 10%. So there is the horror build I've got for you. Unfortunately, I don't have any clips of it in my base or anything like that, although I will try and see what I can get together here in the next few weeks. No promises, however. If you do have questions on the build, comment on that, go ahead and let me know in the comments down below, and I will get back to you. I also want to say thank you to those whose folks appear on the end screen now. I'll be updating this and adding a few more names that have been added in the last 2 weeks pretty shortly here. With that said, until next time, this is going to be Derpy signing out, helping you be a better pirate.